The harsh fluorescent lights of the Walmart on Oakland Avenue in Dallas flooded the sales floor, casting an unforgiving glow over everything as Julia Richardson mechanically ran items through the scanner. She fought to hide the fatigue that had built up over her 6-hour shift. At 28 years old, with a college degree, here she was in a blue uniform vest, her hair perfectly straightened, and her smile perfected from years of practice. "Do you need a bag?" she asked, her voice neutral, without raising her eyes to the customer. "Yes, please," a male voice answered. Julia nodded and reached for the plastic bag with the store's logo. Her motions were automatic: scan, pack, take payment, smile, repeat. This wasn't her dream job, but it paid the bills as she searched for an opportunity to apply her business management degree. The line eventually thinned out, and Julia allowed herself a brief moment of respite. She stretched her stiff shoulders and glanced at her watch. 2 more hours until the end of her shift. 2 more hours of forced smiles and mechanical movements. "Some particularly demanding customers today," Haley Morgan said, approaching Julia's register. Haley worked in the cosmetics department and was the only real friend Julia had at Walmart. "The usual," Julia shrugged. "This morning, a woman threw a fit because we wouldn't accept expired coupons." Haley shook her head in sympathy. Her short, curly hair bounced with her movements, dyed in a bright shade of brown. "Hey, have you noticed the way Travis looks at you?" she asked suddenly, lowering her voice and nodding toward the electronics department. Julia discreetly glanced in that direction. Travis Benson, a tall, thin man with a neatly trimmed beard, was pretending to arrange merchandise on the shelves, but his gaze kept drifting back to Julia. When their eyes accidentally met, he quickly looked away. "I've noticed," Julia said quietly, returning to wiping down the register. "He's strange. He's always trying to start a conversation, but he never knows how to keep it going." "I think he's in love with you," Haley giggled. "Please don't," Julia muttered. "I'm not into relationships right now, especially not with coworkers." Her last major breakup, 8 months ago, still stung with raw pain. Dererick had chosen a job in another state over her, leaving Julia to deal with an apartment rent they couldn't afford on her own. She ended up moving back in with her mother. At 28, a humiliating blow to her pride. "Cashier number 3, service required," a voice called over the speaker, interrupting Julia's thoughts. "It's for me," she sighed. "Talk to you later." The next hour and a half passed in a blur of customers. With only 30 minutes left in her shift, Julia was already dreaming of a hot bath and the quiet of her room. She was just closing the register when she saw Travis approaching. "Hi, Julia," he said nervously, fidgeting with the strap of his wristwatch. "Hi, Travis," she replied, trying to sound polite but not too friendly. I wanted to ask," he stammered. "Would you like to have coffee with me tonight after work?" Julia froze. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. Saying no meant creating an awkward atmosphere at work. Saying yes would only raise false hopes. She thought about it for a moment. Shouldn't she just tell him straight up that she wasn't interested in a relationship? One coffee, a simple conversation, and it would all be clear. "Okay, Travis," she said finally. "But just coffee. I've got things to do today." Travis's face lit up with such joy that Julia felt a pang of guilt. He looked as if he'd just won the lottery. "Just coffee, of course," he grinned. "How about the cafe across the street? 7 o'clock tonight?" "Okay," Julia nodded. "I'll see you there." Travis practically floated away, his feet barely touching the ground. Julia sighed heavily as she finished closing the register. Julia was already second-guessing her decision. "What did you do?" Haley exclaimed when Julia mentioned the upcoming meeting in the staff locker room. I know," Julia groaned, stuffing her uniform vest in her locker. "I just couldn't say no. You should have seen the look in his eyes." "Jules, you're too kind." Haley shook her head. "That guy's been looking at you like you're some kind of goddess for months. You're just going to get his hopes up." "I'll just explain to him that I'm not interested," Julia replied, pulling on her favorite leather jacket. "One coffee is straight talk, and that's it." Haley snorted incredulously. "You do realize you agreed out of pity, right? It never ends well." "Believe me, I know." Julia sighed. "But he was trying so hard. Besides, we're co-workers. I don't want to create an awkward atmosphere at work." "You already have," Haley said sternly. Okay, well, text me how it goes. And be careful. There's something about this guy that makes me wary. It's just coffee in a public place. Julia shrugged. What could happen? Haley rolled her eyes. That's the phrase every heroine says right before something goes wrong. Just stay alert, okay? They stepped out of the service entrance into the cool Dallas evening air. The sky had already begun to darken, and the streetlights flickered on. I'll see you tomorrow, Haley called as she headed for her car. And remember, no promises. No, I'll think about it. No, let's stay friends. Just an honest no. Julia nodded and walked toward the cafe, unease building inside her. Something told her this evening wasn't going to end with a simple, easy breakup of a relationship that had never even started. The Blue Moon Cafe was located at the corner of the shopping center where Walmart was, a modest place with plastic tables and affordable prices. It was popular with the employees of the neighborhood stores. As Julia entered, the bell above the door jingled melodically. Travis was already waiting at a table by the window, nervously tapping his fingers on the tabletop. When he saw her, he leapt up, nearly knocking over his chair. Julia, you came, he exclaimed with such excitement that several of the customers turned around to look. I promised, she replied, taking a seat across from him. 2 cups sat already on the table. Did you order already? She asked. Yes, I hope you like cappuccino, he answered hopefully. I asked for cinnamon on top. Julia didn't like cinnamon, but she decided not to mention it. Thank you, she said, taking a sip. So, how long have you been working at Walmart? He asked. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days, Travis answered without hesitation. I transferred from the Fort Worth store when my mom got sick. She needed constant care. Oh, I'm sorry, Julia said sincerely. I hope she's okay now. Travis's face darkened. She died last year. Lung cancer. Nothing helped. Julia felt her heart squeeze with sympathy. Travis, I'm so sorry. This must be really hard. Yes, he replied simply. But I have you now. Julia froze, the cup halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? Travis leaned forward, his eyes suddenly sparkling with a feverish intensity. You know, Julia, I noticed you the first day you came to work in our store. Do you remember? It was May 23rd of last year. You were wearing a blue dress under your uniform vest, and you kept fixing your hair. Julia squirmed uncomfortably in her chair. She couldn't remember the date or what she had worn on her first day of work. That Travis remembered such details was unsettling. Travis, I think we need to get something straight, she began cautiously. But he interrupted, as if he hadn't heard her. I know everything about you, he said. Your favorite color is purple. You always have chicken salad and an apple for lunch. On Fridays, you allow yourself a chocolate chip cookie from the vending machine. You park on the east side of the parking lot because there's shade from a tree. And you always listen to music on your headphones on the way home. A chill ran down Julia's spine. Everything Travis had said was true. But how could he know all this? Julia felt a wave of discomfort as she realized she was being cornered. Those details. I've never shared that information with you, she said firmly, trying to mask the growing anxiety she felt. Travis, I appreciate your attention, but I think you're misunderstanding our relationship. We're coworkers, and I'd like to keep it that way. The smile on Travis's face didn't waver, but his eyes grew darker. Julia, I know you're just afraid of your feelings. After Derek left you, you built a wall around your heart, but I can help you open up again. The mention of her ex-boyfriend's name made Julia's stomach tighten. She never spoke about Derek at work, not to anyone but Haley. How do you know about Derek? She asked, her pulse quickening. I know a lot about you, Travis said softly, reaching across the table to touch her palm. Julia instinctively jerked her hand away, her discomfort growing. I want you to be my girlfriend, Julia. We're made for each other. I can give you anything you want. Panic rose in Julia's throat. This conversation had gone too far, too quickly. She should have listened to Haley and just turned him down back at the store. Travis, I'm not interested in a relationship, she said clearly and firmly. Especially not with coworkers. I'm sorry if I gave you false hope, but the answer is no. Something dark and dangerous flashed in Travis's eyes for a moment, but then he smiled again, as if putting on a mask. You're just scared, he said. That's normal. I'll wait until you're ready. We have a lot of time ahead of us. No, Travis, Julia said, standing up and grabbing her bag. There is no us here. I'm leaving. Thanks for the coffee, but I don't want to continue this conversation. You're leaving already? Travis sounded childishly disappointed. But we were just getting to know each other. Goodbye, Travis, Julia said firmly as she headed for the exit. I'll see you at work. As she left the cafe, she felt Travis's gaze on her through the window. Once in the safety of her car, Julia exhaled deeply, her hands shaking. She quickly typed a message to Haley. You were right. He's creepy. I'll tell you tomorrow. The next few days at work were tense. Everywhere Julia went, she could feel Travis's eyes on her. He no longer tried to talk to her, but he was always nearby, at the break room, the service entrance, or in a neighboring department. Sometimes, she noticed him pointing his phone camera in her direction, only to quickly look away whenever she caught him looking. He's watching you, Haley said on Thursday as they ate lunch in the staff room. That's not normal, Jules. You need to tell Darius. Darius Parker was their immediate supervisor, a strict but fair department manager. What am I going to say? Julia whispered, feeling uneasy. Excuse me, Mr. Parker. My colleague is looking at me too much. He's not doing anything illegal. Not yet, Haley replied grimly. I've read about cases like this. It starts with harmless glances and ends with, don't get me worked up. Please, Julia interrupted, her frustration rising. It's hard enough being here. At that moment, the door to the break room opened, and Maxwell Knight walked in. A tall, athletic-looking man with short-cropped hair and kind eyes. He worked in the sporting goods department and was always friendly to everyone. Hello, ladies. Maxwell smiled as he headed for the coffee machine. How's your day going? The usual, Haley replied. And yours? Just helped an elderly couple pick out bikes for them and their grandkids, he said, pouring himself a coffee. It's nice to see people who aren't afraid of outdoor activities at that age. Julia smiled. Unlike many of their colleagues, Maxwell genuinely loved his job and treated customers with care. Julia, I've been meaning to ask you for a while, he said suddenly, turning to her. Would you like to have dinner with me on Saturday night? I have tickets to a jazz concert at Clyde Warren Park, and then we can eat at that new Creole restaurant. Julia froze for a moment. The invitation was unexpected but pleasant. She liked Maxwell. He was smart, considerate, and, unlike Travis, never overstepped his boundaries. Plus, she'd been wanting to visit that restaurant for a long time. It sounds wonderful, she said sincerely. I'd love to go. Great. Maxwell brightened. I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock. Will you write down your address for me? Julia was about to pull out her phone to exchange contact details when the door opened again, and Travis walked in. He froze at the threshold, his gaze shifting between Julia and Maxwell, his face slowly contorting into an uncomfortable grimace. I apologize for the intrusion, he said coldly, and with that he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. An awkward silence hung in the air. What was that about? Maxwell asked, his brow furrowed as he looked back at the door. It's a long story, Julia sighed. I'll tell you on Saturday. After lunch, Travis disappeared and was nowhere to be found. Julia felt a temporary wave of relief. Perhaps he'd finally gotten the hint. By the end of the workday, her mood had improved significantly. The thought of her upcoming date with Maxwell brought a warmth to her heart, and she felt hopeful for the first time in a while. On Friday, despite the fatigue of the workweek, Julia's mood remained elevated. During her break, she eagerly shared the news of her Saturday date with a few coworkers. Maxwell took me out to dinner and a jazz concert, she told Haley, Tammy, and Shanice, who worked in the clothing department. Really? Shanice exclaimed. Girl, you're lucky. Half the female staff has a crush on him. Tammy nodded. Handsome, smart, well-mannered, unlike some people. Julia knew the comment was directed at Travis, even though Tammy didn't name him. I've liked him for a while, Julia admitted. I just didn't think he was paying attention to me. Are you kidding? Haley snorted. He looks at you every time you walk by the sporting goods department. It's just that unlike some people, he knows how to be subtle. The girls laughed, but their fun was interrupted by the sound of a box falling. They turned to see Travis standing in the aisle, surrounded by scattered headphones. His gaze was fixed on Julia, a mixture of pain and anger in his eyes. "Travis, are you okay?" Tammy asked, but he didn't respond. Instead, he began collecting the scattered headphones carelessly, not paying attention to what he was doing. His movements were abrupt, clumsy, like he was struggling to keep control. "So, are you two officially dating now?" he asked finally, raising his eyes to meet Julia's. His voice was strangely flat, which only intensified the unease Julia was feeling. "It's none of your business, Travis," Julia replied firmly. "Of course it's none of mine," he said with a crooked smile, but his eyes stayed cold. "I just wonder what's so special about him. Why him and not me?" The girls exchanged concerned glances. "Travis, this isn't the time or place for this conversation," Julia said quietly, her shoulders tense. "Where is?" he shot back bitterly. "In the cafe? You didn't want to listen to me there. At work? You don't want to listen to me here either. Maybe I should just come to your house." 42 Maple Street. Julia froze. She hadn't told him where she lived. "How'd he know?" "Never mind." Travis cut her off, rising to his feet with the box still in his hands. "Have fun on your date. I hope it's worth it." With those words, he turned and walked away, leaving behind an oppressive silence. "Shit," Shanice exhaled. "This guy is really scary." "Julia, you need to tell Darius," Haley insisted. "It's not just awkward attention anymore. He's watching you. He knows where you live." "Yeah, I'll think about it," Julia mumbled, feeling her hand shake. The unease that had been bubbling inside her was now overwhelming. Maybe after the weekend, she'd tell Darius. The rest of the day passed in tension. Julia kept glancing around, expecting to see Travis, but he didn't show up again. It didn't bring relief. If anything, it made her more anxious. What was he planning? How far was he willing to go? That evening, when Julia got home, she found her mother, Lauren Richardson, in the kitchen, cooking her signature vegetable roast. "Hi, honey," Lauren smiled as Julia walked in. "Rough day." Julia didn't answer. She sank into a chair, letting out a long sigh. Her mind raced with thoughts of Travis and the unsettling encounter earlier. For a moment, she considered telling her mother about Travis, but Lauren was already worried about her all the time. Would it be fair to add more stress to her life? Lauren was too perceptive not to notice something was off. Would she be able to handle it if Julia confided in her? For now, Julia stayed silent, feeling the weight of her unease settle deep in her chest. She wasn't sure what to do next, but the feeling that something was wrong refused to leave her. Julia's mother, Lauren, glanced at her daughter as she stood by the stove. "Just problems with a coworker," Julia replied, trying to deflect the conversation. "Nothing serious." Lauren turned around, her eyes narrowing with concern. "Julia, Aisha Richardson," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I know that look. You're hiding something. What's going on?" Julia sighed, realizing there was no point in keeping it from her mother. "There's this guy at work, Travis. He's been taking an unhealthy interest in me. I turned him down, but he won't take no for an answer. Today, he even mentioned our address, even though I've never told him where I live." Lauren's expression darkened immediately. "This is serious, Julia. Have you told your superiors?" "Not yet," Julia admitted, feeling conflicted. "He hasn't done anything illegal. He's just watching me, saying strange things." "That's enough," Lauren said, her tone suddenly hardening as she sat down across from her daughter. "Listen to me, sweetheart. I've worked in the Social Security system for 30 years, and I've seen situations like this before. At first, it's just odd glances and chance encounters. But then things escalate into something much more dangerous." Julia lowered her gaze. Her mother was right. She had ignored the warning signs for too long. She thought back to the times Travis had lingered a little too long, made too many comments. Julia had brushed it off, convincing herself that it was nothing. But now, sitting with her mother, she knew she had been wrong to ignore it. Julia spent nearly 2 hours preparing for her date with Maxwell. She showered, styled her hair into soft waves, chose a deep purple dress that highlighted her figure, and applied minimal makeup. Despite the excitement about the evening, anxiety still bubbled in her chest. She was looking forward to her time with Maxwell, but thoughts of Travis kept creeping into her mind. You look beautiful, Lauren said, standing in the doorway of Julia's room, her eyes soft with pride. That young man is a lucky man. Julia smiled weakly, adjusting her hair in the mirror. I hope everything goes well, she said, her voice laced with nervousness. Something's bothering you, Lauren observed, stepping closer. Is it because of that guy, Travis? Julia sighed, not surprised her mother had picked up on it. Yeah, I can't stop thinking about what he might do when he finds out I'm dating Maxwell. Lauren walked over and placed her hands on Julia's shoulders. Honey, you can't let fear control your life. If he's truly a threat, we'll go to the police. Julia gave a bitter grin. What am I going to say? Help. There's a guy looking at me too closely. They won't do anything unless he actually does something. Then be careful, Lauren said seriously. Keep your phone with you at all times, and if anything feels off, don't hesitate to call. Julia nodded and hugged her mother tightly. Thanks, Mom. I'll be careful. Just then, the doorbell rang. Lauren smiled softly. I'll get it. You finish up here and come downstairs. Maxwell was waiting in the living room when Julia came downstairs. His eyes lit up as soon as he saw her. He nervously rubbed the sleeve of his dark blue jacket, looking even more handsome than usual, stylishly dressed with a small bouquet of purple irises in his hands. Julia, he exhaled, you look amazing. Thank you, she said, her cheeks flushing slightly. You too. This is for you, Maxwell said, offering the bouquet. Haley mentioned that purple is your favorite color. Julia smiled and accepted the flowers, inhaling their sweet fragrance. They're beautiful. Thank you. Lauren, watching from the doorway, smiled softly. I'll put these in a vase, she said, taking the flowers from Julia's hands. You two go enjoy your evening. It was nice to meet you, Mrs. Richardson, Maxwell said politely. You too, Maxwell. Take care of my little girl. I promise, he replied seriously. As they stepped outside into the warm evening, Maxwell opened the door to his car, an elegant dark gray sedan, polished and well-maintained, much like its owner. So, where are we going first? Julia asked as she buckled her seatbelt. I thought we could take a stroll through Clyde Warren Park before the concert, Maxwell replied. The evening is too nice to stay indoors right away. That sounds like a great idea, Julia agreed wholeheartedly. Clyde Warren Park, located on the site of a former overpass, was one of the most beautiful spots in Dallas, offering a perfect backdrop for a pleasant evening. A modern urban oasis, complete with an artificial pond, intricate gardens, and winding pathways, Clyde Warren Park was the perfect escape. By the time they arrived, the sun had started to dip below the horizon, casting warm, golden hues over everything. As they strolled through the park, their conversation flowed easily. Maxwell shared stories from his childhood in New Orleans, his family's move to Dallas after Hurricane Katrina, and his passion for jazz and basketball. Julia, in turn, spoke about her time in college, her dream of opening her own small business, and the complicated relationship she had with her father, who had left when she was just 12. You know, Maxwell said as they paused by a small lily pond, I've been watching you at the store for almost a year now. Julia stiffened at his words, her mind flashing to Travis and his similar comments. But Maxwell quickly continued, not in a bad way, of course. It's just, you've always stood out. Your kindness toward customers, your smile. I've tried a few times to gather the courage to ask you out, but I always found an excuse. Julia, feeling a twinge of curiosity, asked softly, what changed? Maxwell grinned. Yesterday, Haley came up to me and said, if you don't ask Julia out in the next 24 hours, I will personally tell her you're writing her name on the fogged-up mirror in the locker room. Julia laughed, her anxiety easing. Are you seriously doing this? No, of course not. Maxwell feigned indignation but winked. I'm writing it on the fogged-up glass of the shower stall. They both laughed, and Julia felt the tension of the past few days begin to dissolve. Maxwell was easy to be around. There were no awkward comments, no unsettling stares, just a natural, comfortable conversation that felt mutual. As the evening deepened, they made their way to the heart of the park, where a small outdoor amphitheater had been set up for the concert. The musicians were tuning their instruments, and the crowd had already begun to settle into the chairs arranged in a semicircle. "Wait here," Maxwell said as they found their seats. "I'll grab us some food before the concert starts." As Julia waited, watching the musicians prepare, her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out, and her heart sank. A message from an unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. "You look beautiful in that dress. Purple really is your color." Her pulse quickened as she scanned the crowd, her eyes darting around, but she couldn't see anyone who looked suspicious. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. Her phone buzzed again, and her stomach dropped. "Maxwell isn't right for you. He can't protect you the way I can." Cold sweat broke out across her forehead. She stood up, her breath catching in her throat as she looked around, frantic. The park was filled with families, elderly couples, teenagers, and tourists. But where was he? How did he know where she would be? "Julia!" Maxwell's voice broke through her panic. He stood next to her, holding 2 paper cups and a bag of food. "Did something happen?" She showed him the phone. "It's Travis. He's somewhere in the park. He's watching us." Maxwell's face darkened as he glanced at the phone and then back at Julia. "Travis? Our colleague from electronics." "Yeah," Julia said, her voice trembling. "We had a problem. I'll explain later. Right now, I just want to get out of here." Maxwell nodded without hesitation. "Of course. Let's go to the car." They hurried down the path toward the park exit, but Julia felt a wave of panic building inside her with every person they passed. Every glance in their direction felt like an intrusion, making her heart race. As they neared the parking lot, Julia saw him, Travis. He was standing by the exit, leaning casually against a tree as though he were simply enjoying the evening. He wore a dark jacket, hands stuffed in his pockets, and a strange, almost dreamy smile on his face. "There he is," Julia whispered, squeezing Maxwell's hand. At the exit, Maxwell looked toward Travis, his face tightening. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We'll just walk past. If he tries anything, I'll handle it." "Maxwell, he could be dangerous," Julia warned. "It'll be okay," Maxwell said confidently, but Julia could see the tension in his eyes. They kept walking toward the exit, trying to look natural. As they passed Travis, he stepped away from the tree and blocked their path. "What a nice meeting," he said with a smile that sent chills down Julia's spine. Travis gave a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Julia, won't you introduce me to your friend?" "Step back, Travis," Julia said firmly, feeling Maxwell move slightly forward, closing the gap between her and Travis. "It's rude," Travis shook his head, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "After everything that's happened between us?" "There was nothing between us," Julia shot back sharply, her patience wearing thin. "And there won't be. Please leave us alone." Maxwell stepped forward, his voice steady. "Look, buddy, we just want to pass through quietly. Don't cause any trouble." "Trouble?" Travis feigned surprise, his eyes narrowing. "What kind of trouble?" "I just want to talk to Julia." "You don't mind, do you, Julia?" "I do mind," Julia said, trying to steady her breath and fighting the urge to turn and run. "We're leaving." They tried to step around Travis, but he moved again, blocking their path. "She's mine," he growled, his gaze darkening as he focused on Maxwell. "You have no right to touch her." "Dude, are you crazy?" Maxwell frowned. "Julie is not anyone's property, and she's made it clear that she doesn't want anything to do with you." Travis stepped closer, his eyes flashing with something darker. "You don't know anything about her. I've been watching her for months. I know what coffee she drinks, what music she listens to, what books she reads. I know she sleeps on the left side of the bed and that she brushes her teeth first in the morning before washing her face. I know she has nightmares on Tuesdays and that she cries when she thinks no one can see." A cold shiver ran down Julia's spine. Everything Travis said was true. Every little detail. How could he know such intimate things about her life? "Were you following me?" she whispered, fear crawling up her chest. "Were you at my house?" Travis smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Julia had ever seen. "I'm always around, Julia. Always looking out for you." Maxwell stepped forward resolutely. "This stops now. You don't go near Julia anymore. You don't call her. You don't send her messages. If I find out you're stalking her again, I'll personally go to the police." Travis's gaze shifted to Maxwell, and something changed in his eyes, something wild, almost animalistic. "You think you could just come and get her?" He spat, his voice low and filled with venom. "You think you're worthy of her?" "Travis, stop it!" Julia shouted, but it was too late. With a sudden, terrifying speed, Travis lunged at Maxwell and punched him in the face. Maxwell staggered but held his ground, instinctively defending himself. The two men struggled, Travis's blows fueled by the fury of a man who had completely lost control. Maxwell fought back, pushing Travis away as best he could. A crowd quickly gathered around them. Some shouted for them to stop, while others began filming the scene. Julia stood frozen, paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. "She's mine!" Travis screamed, throwing punch after punch. "You'll never get her!" Finally, two men from the crowd rushed in, pulling Travis away, but he continued to lash out, still shouting. "Julia, tell him you belong to me." Maxwell was breathing heavily, wiping the blood from his lip. His jacket was torn, and a bruise was already forming on his cheekbone. He was barely holding it together. "You have to be with me," Travis continued to shout, his voice full of desperation. "We're meant for each other. He can't love you the way I do." "Take him away," someone called out, and Julia's heart sank as she saw a couple of bystanders reach for their phones to call the police. "No," Julia said suddenly, her voice shaky but determined. She turned to Maxwell. "Let's just leave. Please." Maxwell nodded silently, and, without a word, they hurried toward the parking lot, leaving Travis behind, still screaming as people held him down. Once they were in the car, Julia couldn't hold back anymore. The floodgates opened, and she began to cry. The fear, the tension, and the shock of everything that had just happened overwhelmed her. Maxwell reached over and gently placed his hand on her shoulder, offering a small pack of tissues. "I'm so sorry," Julia said through her tears. "I didn't think it would turn out like this." "It's not your fault," Maxwell said softly. "But you need to go to the police, Julia. What he's doing is harassment. It's serious." Julia wiped her eyes and nodded. "I know. I'll talk to Darius on Monday. This kind of behavior isn't acceptable in the workplace. It's not just about work." Maxwell didn't say anything further, but the car ride was quiet, with only the sound of Julia's quiet sobs filling the space. Both of them knew things were far from over. Maxwell spoke seriously, his voice laced with concern. "What he said about knowing how you sleep, about your nightmares, Julia, he might have been sneaking into your house." The thought had crossed her mind before, but hearing it from someone else made the horror feel all too real. "I cannot go home," she whispered, the anxiety creeping up her throat. "My mom's there alone. What if he—" "I'll drive you," Maxwell said firmly. "I'll stay the night if I have to, or you can go to a hotel. But you really should report it to the police first." Julia nodded, grateful for his support. "Thank you, Maxwell. I don't know what I would have done without you today." He smiled softly, despite the bruise on his lip. "That's what friends are for." Julia noticed his hesitation before the word friends, and she realized that their first date, which had promised to be the start of something wonderful, had instead turned into a nightmare. "Let's go home," she said quietly. "I need to warn my mom." Monday came all too quickly. Julia spent the weekend in a state of constant tension, flinching at every noise, checking the locks on doors and windows. Maxwell stayed close by. He'd spent the night at her house on Saturday, and on Sunday, he arrived first thing in the morning, helping install new locks and motion sensors for their security system. Lauren, Julia's mom, was horrified when she heard what had happened at the park. "We have to go to the police," she insisted. "We have no proof, Mom," Julia replied tiredly. "He didn't do anything except hit Maxwell, and he doesn't want to press charges. Everything else is just words." But deep down, Julia knew the situation was getting out of hand. So, when she walked into Walmart on Monday morning, her first decision was to find Darius, their supervisor, and tell him everything. But before she could do that, she spotted Travis setting up merchandise in his department, acting as if nothing had happened. When he saw her, he smiled politely, as if their encounter on Saturday had never occurred. The normality of his behavior, so soon after the chaos of Saturday, was chilling. Julia decided she couldn't wait any longer. She walked over to him, trying to remain calm despite the storm brewing inside. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "Alone." Travis smirked, his tone almost like a date proposal. "Of course, Julia," he answered, his voice almost too eager. "Now." "In the back," she replied firmly. He followed her obediently, and they went into the back office, a small room cluttered with boxes. Julia left the door ajar, not wanting to be completely enclosed with Travis. "Travis," she began, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "What happened on Saturday was unacceptable. Your behavior scares me." "I was just defending you," he replied, genuinely surprised. "This guy isn't right for you, Julia. He doesn't understand you the way I do." "You weren't protecting me," Julia said firmly, her voice steady. "You were attacking my friend. And it's not just that. You've been following me. You know things you couldn't have found out through normal means. Have you been to my house?" Travis smiled, but it was a smile that made Julia's skin crawl. "I just want to take care of you. Make sure you're okay." "This is stalking, Travis," Julia said sharply. "And it's against the law. I'm here to tell you that it stops now. You stay away from me and my boyfriend. If I see you near my house again, or if you try to contact me outside of work, I'm going to Darius, and you will be fired." Travis looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Part hurt, part confusion, and something else that was darker. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "I love you, Julia. I've loved you from the first moment I saw you. Every day, I wake up thinking of you and fall asleep picturing your face. You're the air I breathe." Julia felt a chill run down her spine. "That's not love, Travis," she said, shaking her head. "It's an obsession, and it scares me." "I'd do anything for you," he continued, as if he hadn't heard her. "I'll give you anything you want. I'll protect you until my last breath. Why can't you see that? Why do you reject me for this, Maxwell?" "Because I don't feel that way about you," Julia replied, her voice calm but resolute. "And I never will. What you're doing is wrong. It has to stop." Travis's eyes suddenly darkened. The shift in his expression sent a wave of unease through Julia. This was no longer just a confrontation. It felt dangerous, and she could sense he was no longer playing by any rules. "I can't stop," he whispered, his voice thick with desperation. "I can't stop loving you. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop dreaming about us. It's stronger than I am." A chill crept down Julia's spine. There was something almost fanatical in his words, in the intensity of his gaze. "Then I have no choice," Julia said, taking a step toward the door. "I'm going to Darius's." Travis grabbed her wrist with a force so sharp that Julia cried out in pain. His grip was like steel. His eyes, once a dull brown, now seemed almost black with rage. "No," he growled. "You're not going to him. You're staying with me." Julia tugged against him, trying to pull free, but his fingers only tightened. "Let me go," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "Please, Travis, let me go and we can talk calmly." For a brief moment, his grip loosened, and Julia used the opportunity to break free. She took a step back, rubbing her wrist, which was already starting to bruise from the force of his hold. "That's it, Travis," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I'm going to Darius. You've overstepped your bounds." She turned and walked quickly toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't until she was safely behind a closed door in Darius's office that she allowed herself to exhale. Darius Parker, a reserved man with a neat short beard and attentive eyes, listened as Julia recounted the events. Occasionally, he asked clarifying questions, but he remained mostly silent, his face impassive, though his eyes revealed growing concern. "And you say he knew personal details about your life?" Darius asked once she had finished. "Things he could only have learned by watching you at home?" Julia nodded. "Yes. He knew how I sleep when I have nightmares. It scares me, Mr. Parker. I don't feel safe." Darius sighed and rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "What you're describing is serious, Julia. It's not just inappropriate behavior in the workplace. It's harassment and possibly more serious violations of the law." He straightened in his chair, his demeanor shifting to one of determination. "I'm calling Travis in right now. Will you fire him?" Julia asked, her voice trembling as she rubbed her wrist, still sore from his grip. Absolutely, Darius replied firmly. Walmart's corporate policy strictly prohibits any form of harassment or threats. What you've described is more than enough to warrant immediate dismissal. He won't be reinstated. Darius picked up the phone and dialed an extension. Cheryl, please locate Travis Benson and ask him to report to my office immediately. After a brief pause, he continued, Yes, immediately. And call security. Once the call ended, Darius turned to Julia. I would also recommend that you file a formal police report. In situations like this, it's best to be safe, especially if you think he might have broken into your house. Julia nodded, feeling a small sense of relief that her concerns were being taken seriously. I'll do it tonight, she said quietly. The wait for Travis felt like an eternity. Darius offered her a cup of water, which she accepted gratefully, trying to calm her nerves. Finally, there was a knock at the door. Cheryl, the staff administrator, entered, her face tense. Mr. Parker, we can't find Travis Benson, she reported. He's not in the department, and no one has seen him since his shift started. Darius's frown deepened. Are you sure he came to work today? Yes, Cheryl confirmed. He checked in at the entrance at 8 o'clock this morning, but he's nowhere to be found. Julia's anxiety spiked again. He was in the back with me about half an hour ago, she said, her voice suddenly shaking. After we talked, I don't know where he went. Cheryl looked at Darius, and he spoke quickly. Make sure he hasn't left the building. Also, have security review the surveillance tapes. We need to know where he is. Cheryl nodded and rushed out. Darius turned to Julia. It looks like he realized you were going to complain and decided to run. That only confirms he knew his actions were wrong. He paused for a moment before adding, whether we find him now or not, he's fired. I will personally make sure his belongings are packed up and sent to his home, and that his access pass is revoked. Julia nodded, relieved that Darius was taking action. At least now, she didn't feel so alone in this. She could only hope that Travis's behavior would finally be stopped, once and for all. Cheryl returned 10 minutes later with the news. He left the building through the service exit 40 minutes ago, she reported. The cameras recorded him walking quickly to the parking lot, getting into his car, and driving away. Darius turned to Julia. You said you were living with your mother? Yes. Julia nodded, panic rising in her chest. Call her right now, Darius urged. Make sure she's all right. Julia fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking. She dialed her mother's number. The dial tone sounded, but there was no answer. She tried again with the same result. She's not answering, Julia whispered, her heart skipping a beat. She should be home. It's her day off. Cheryl, call the police, Darius ordered, his tone firm. Tell them we have a possible stalking situation and that the suspect may be a threat. He turned to Julia. Maybe it's okay. Maybe your mother can't hear the phone or went out to the store, but it's best not to take any chances. Julia nodded, trying to suppress the rising panic. She dialed her mother's number again, but the same ringing continued, endless and unanswered. Julia, Darius said softly, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. The police are on their way. You can go home right now if you want. I'll send someone from security with you. Yes, thank you. Julia nodded, standing up quickly. I have to make sure she's okay. The drive home felt like the longest ride of her life, despite the Walmart security guard escorting her speeding every step of the way. Julia kept dialing her mother's number with increasing desperation. When they finally turned on a Maple Street, relief flooded Julia's chest at the sight of her mother's car parked in the driveway. That meant she was home, but that relief quickly evaporated into fresh terror. The dark blue Honda parked beside the driveway was one she recognized, Travis's car. That's his car. Julia pointed to the vehicle, her heart sinking. He's here. Stay in the car, the guard ordered, pulling out a walkie-talkie. I'm calling for backup. But Julia couldn't wait. Her mother might be in danger. She flung open the car door before the guard could stop her and rushed toward the house. The front door was ajar, a terrible sign. Mom, are you here? Julia called, her voice shaking. There was no answer, only a heavy, ominous silence. She ran through the living room, then into the kitchen, checking the dining room. No one. She rushed to the first-floor bathroom and her mother's study. Empty. "The police are on their way," the guard called after her. "We'd better wait outside." "No." Julia shook her head, refusing to leave. "My mother is here." She headed toward the stairs to the second floor. As she climbed, she heard voices, a quiet, pleading voice that she recognized as her mother's, and a lower, tense voice from Travis. They were coming from her bedroom. The guard tried to stop her, but Julia was already at the door. She swung it open and froze in horror. Lauren was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale and filled with fear. Across from her, near the window, stood Travis. He held a gun in his hand, pointed at the floor, but clearly ready to rise at any moment. "Julia," Travis said, smiling as though he was welcoming a long-awaited guest. "You came home early. I wanted to prepare a surprise for you." "Travis," Julia said carefully, taking a slow step into the room. "What are you doing here? Why did you come?" "I came to get you," he answered, his voice unervingly calm, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "We should be together, Julia. I prepared everything for you. We'll go far away from here, start a new life, just you and me." "Julia, go away," Lauren said quietly, but Travis raised his gun sharply, pointing it directly at her. "Shut up," he shouted, his voice filled with anger. "Stay out of this. She has to make her own choice." "It's okay, Mom," Julia said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Travis, let's talk. Just you and me." The tension in the room was unbearable. Julia knew she needed to stay calm, but every instinct in her told her how dangerous this moment was. She couldn't let Travis think he could control her. She had to make him see sense, or at least give herself a chance to escape. "Please, just put the gun down." Julia's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes fixed on the weapon in Travis's hand. The Walmart security guard had quietly retreated into the hallway, likely calling for backup. Julia prayed that the police wouldn't arrive with sirens blaring, that they wouldn't escalate the situation and force Travis into making a move he might regret forever. "What should we talk about?" Travis asked, his tone a little calmer but still cold, though the gun remained pointed at the floor. "You've already said everything. You wanted Darius to get me fired. You chose Maxwell over me. You rejected my love." "I was scared," Julia responded, her voice steady despite the fear rising within her. She took another cautious step toward him, trying to keep him calm. "You scare me, Travis. The way you watch me, the way you approach this, that's not how it's done." "How was it done?" he retorted bitterly. "I was paying attention. I cared. I studied everything you like to make you happy. Isn't that love?" "Love is built on reciprocity and respect," Julia said softly, her eyes never leaving his. She continued to step forward slowly. Not fear and coercion. She could see it, the internal battle raging inside him. One part of him seemed to recognize the truth of her words, but the darker, obsessive part refused to give in. "I'm giving you one last chance, Julia," Travis said finally, his voice suddenly cold and hard. "The choice is simple. Either you stay with me, or you die." "No," Lauren exclaimed, her voice panicked as she jumped up from the bed. "Sit down," Travis shouted, his gun pointing at her. Julia took the moment to step closer, her voice steady despite the panic building inside her. "Travis," she said quietly, her words piercing the tension in the room, "I can't be with you. Not like this. Not under threat. I could never love a man who threatens me and my family." Something in his eyes shifted. The hope that had been there faded, replaced by cold, hardened determination. "Then you've made your choice," he said, raising the gun and pointing it directly at Julia. "No more talking." "Travis, please," Julia whispered, frozen in place, feeling the weight of the situation press in on her chest. "Don't do this." "I love you, Julia," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "So much that I can't let you be with anyone else." The first shot rang out, deafening in the small room. Julia felt a searing pain in her shoulder and staggered backward. A second shot followed, then a third, a fourth. Each bullet felt like a new wave of agony crashing through her body. She collapsed to the floor, her vision blurring. The fifth, sixth, seventh shots followed. Lauren's screams echoed in her ears, but everything felt distant now, muffled. Julia saw her mother rush to her, covering her with her own body, begging Travis to stop. But it was too late. Julia could feel the life draining from her body. The pain began to fade, the world turning hazy around her. She saw her mother's face, contorted in horror above her, and heard the distant sound of police sirens growing closer. Travis stood frozen, gun in hand, his face twisting with realization. His eyes locked onto Julia's bleeding form, and then to the gun in his hand. "No," he whispered, his voice shaking with guilt. "No, no, no, Julia." He took a step toward her, but recoiled, as though the sight of what he had done was too much to bear. The gun dropped from his hand, clattering loudly to the floor. "I didn't mean to," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I just wanted you to love me." From downstairs, the sound of the police shouting, running into the house, reached Julia's ears. Travis looked at the door, then at the window. He made a decision. With one last glance at Julia, he rushed to the window, swung it open, and disappeared into the night, not looking back. The last thing Julia saw, before everything fell into darkness, was her mother's tear-streaked face leaning over her, begging her to hold on, promising that help was on the way. But Julia knew help was too late. Too many shots, too much blood. Darkness swallowed her whole, and her final thought was one of regret. The unfulfilled dreams, the unspoken love, and her mother who would be left to bear the weight of this tragedy alone. Meanwhile, Travis ran. He scrambled through backyards, climbed over fences, and squeezed through hedges. His hands were stained with Julia's blood, and the thought of it spurred him to run faster, as though he could escape what he had done. Travis didn't know where he was running to. There was no plan, no safe place, no future. Only the thought that he had lost everything. "I just wanted you to love me," he whispered, stopping under a massive tree. The sound of the police sirens grew closer. Soon, they would find him. Soon, it would all be over. The memory of Julia, the way she smiled, the way her gaze met his as the bullets tore through her, would haunt him forever. Even if forever only lasted a few hours or days, it would be etched in his mind for life.